This video will cover steps to complete Chapter 3, Challenge Yourself 6.3 project. So this is our first project in Excel. I apologize, I have a cold. So the first thing we want to do is kind of read the scenario. So for this project, we're working as an accountant for the National Pharmaceutical Sales, and we're working on a spreadsheet that has each sales associate statistics. So we'll be looking at stuff such as commission and average commission, median, and those types of statistics for this pharmaceutical company. This is probably not stuff you would use every day, but this is a good project to kind of give you a feeling for the capabilities that Excel actually has. So we'll go ahead and we'll probably use several functions in here that you may not be familiar with, but this will give you a feel for using them and kind of understanding where you get the values to complete that function. So if you haven't already, go ahead and open your start file and enable editing. And on step 3, which is where we jump into start, it tells us that we want to start on the sales data tab, or the sales data worksheet. So we have a summary worksheet and we have sales data. So go ahead and click on sales data, and it gives us an important little tip right off the bat. And it's for the first function that we'll use. It's asking us to use the ifs function, but it also tells us you may not have access to that. I do not. I only have access to the if function. And this is kind of based on which version of Office 2016 that you have. I have the Professional Plus, and it's not available on that version. So if you have a subscription version, you probably have access to it. So either way will work. If you are able to figure it out using IFS, I encourage you to do so. This video will use the IF function. So I have to use a nested function, which is a little more, there's a few more steps. The IFS function kind of streamlines it so you're not going through as many steps. So we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. So it's telling us beginning in cell F4. So I'm going to go ahead and click on cell F4. So that's my active cell. It wants us to enter a function or a formula using the IFS function to calculate the commission rate based on the following table. So in this table, it tells us if the salesperson is selling greater than or equal to $225,000, they get 6% commission. But if they don't sell that much, if it's greater than or equal to $175,000, it should be 4%. So it would be less than 225, but greater than 175. And then the next one is if it's greater than 100, but less than 175, it should be 2%. So with this formula, we can put those values in there and kind of build that parameter. So the first thing we want to do is put in our equal sign, so that identifies to Excel that we want to put in a formula. And we want to use the if function. So if, and I'll go ahead and put my parenthesis in, and it gives me a little screen tip here that tells me the values that I need to put in. So the logical test is cell E4. If $73,647 is, and so for our first value, if it's greater than or equal to $225,000, so let's type that in. We want that salesperson to earn 6% commission. And then if not though, so we want to put that comma in, and we want to put in our if function, and we got to put if again, and then this is where the nested part comes in. So we're nesting this inside of the original. Then we want to type in if E4 is greater than or equal to 175,000, they should earn 4% commission. And again, we want to do this if, and this is our next nest. If they earn greater than or equal to 100,000, they should earn 2%. Now on this one, we want to go ahead and put in that value if false, because we don't want to continue on with this. We're kind of to the end. So if they earn 2% for greater than $100,000, our table says that they earn 0% if less. So we can go ahead and put that 0% in here, and that way we've ended it. And then we want to close our parenthesis. And notice that we have 3 different formulas nested here. So 1, 2, 3. So that means we need 3 parentheses at the end to close this. And Excel does kind of give you these color coded, so you know that, our first one is black, our second one is red, and then our third one is this purple. And so once we have this formula in here, we can go ahead and click enter, or we can click on this check mark in the formula bar. And let me get to the end of my formula, then do it. Oh, and it's telling me I forgot to put a value in here. So that's one of the nice things. So here we needed to have E4. So we can click E4 again, or we can manually type it in. Now I should be able to get that. And as you can see, that commission rate for this first one is 0.00. And that's right, because remember, everything under $100,000 is 0% commission. So the next thing it wants us to do is fill the formula down through cell F64. So I'll just double click on that corner, and that'll take that formula all the way down. Now one thing you may note that we have in the formula bar, we have 6%, and we actually want to see that as 6%. So we could go up here and change that to percent style. And it wants us to center those values. So once we have that changed to percent, then we can come up here in our alignment group and click on center. All right, so now in cell G4, so it's right here next to where we calculated commission, it wants us to calculate the commission earned by multiplying the annual sales by the commission rate. This is a simple formula. So we just want equals, and we want to type in, we can type in or click cell E4, and we want to multiply it by cell F4. Then we can hit enter, and we've got that commission. And again, we want to copy that down to cell 64. And then, oh, but before we do that, it actually wanted us to add a rounding function to cell G4. So you'll notice where these are all already rounded to 2 decimal places, but we do need to add that to it. So we can put our insertion point up here in the formula bar, and we can type in round. And then we want to put that in a parenthesis. And notice that when we are rounding, we have to have a number, and then we have to have the number of digits. So this E4 times F4 is our number, and then we want to round that 2 decimal places. So then we can close that and check, and then we just want to copy that all the way down to G64. And just check to make sure you did that, because it has to have that round on there to get credit. Okay, and then it wants us to change the format for this column to the comma style. So again, just Home tab, number group, and click on comma style. Alright, so now step 4. It wants us to switch over to the summary sheet. And so I'm going to click the summary tab. And it wants us to calculate the average and median sales commissions. So we have annual sales and commission earned, and we have column for average, median, and standard deviation. Alright, so to get started, we can see as we're reading through the instructions that they've already named some ranges for us. And it tells us in the instructions, it says use the named ranges shown in cells A23 to B26. So the first thing we want to do is we want to click on cell B5, and it wants us to enter a formula to calculate the average annual sales for all sales associates using the named range annual sales. So if we click on our formulas, we have access to our different functions here. And then you can see in this named or defined names manager, we have some, if we click on use in formulas, we have these named ranges that were created for us. So to get our first formula going, we want to type in equals, and we want to find average. And then this one's pretty simple. We want, we can select the range, but in this case we have a defined range. So we want to click in use in formula, and we just want to click annual sales. And we want to close that parenthesis and then check. Alright, so the next thing it wants us to do is in cell C5, it wants us to enter a formula to calculate the median annual sales for all sales associates. And we want to use the same named range. So we can start typing in median, since it tells us which one we want to use. And it helps if I spell it correctly. And then we get the little screen tip, returns the median of the number in the middle of the set of given numbers. So again, we just want to put that parenthesis in there, and we can select that range, or again, as the instruction tells us, we want to base it on the annual sales range, and we want to close that. And so then our next step is in cell D5, we want to enter a formula to calculate the standard deviation. So if you're not sure what the abbreviation or if it spells out standard deviation, we can go to more functions and we can type in standard deviation, and we can do a search for it. Sorry, I have a couple different things open here. Now, one thing I will mention on this one is, and I went off of it, so let me go back and do my search. So let me do standard deviation and hit enter. And now we get a list of different functions that calculate standard deviation. Our instruction tells us that we want to do standard deviation for sales. The data set is the sample of a larger population. So if you read through some of these descriptions, the first one doesn't really give us what we want. So we want to make sure that we find a standard deviation that works with larger populations or is based on a sample. So this standard dev.s is actually, it calculates it based on a sample. So this is the one we want to use. And again, this is kind of advanced. So there are hints in our instructions, and these are things that if you start using them, you'll become more familiar with it. I do not expect you to have when to use these formulas memorized by any means, but this is good practice on how to use them. So go ahead and click OK. And for this, when we do it this way, we actually get the function arguments box instead of the screen tip. So again, we want to base this on annual sales. So we can type in annual sales, or we can come up here to our use formula. And we don't have a second number, so we can just hit OK. Now, it wants us to add a rounding function to the formula in D5. So again, we're just creating that nested formula. So we know we want to round, so we can go ahead and type in round and put in that parenthesis. And then we just have to tell it how much we want to round it to, which is 2 decimal places. So we come over here to the end of sales. and we put in that comma 2, and then we want to close that parenthesis. And then click check. And now we have those 2 decimal places. So now in cell B6, it wants us to enter a formula to calculate the average commission. Use the named range commission earned. So same thing, we're still using average, but we're basing it on a different defined range. So we can type in equals average, and then we can go up here to our using formula, and this time we want to use commission earned. And then we want to close that parenthesis and then just hit enter. Same thing with median, equals median, and then we choose our range and commission earned. We want to close that. We can press enter. And then in D, we want to enter the standard deviations for commissions. This data set is also a sample of a larger population, so we want to use that same standard .s. And if we look in our recently used, it should pop right up. So I'm going to choose that one. And again, we want to use commission earned, and we want to click OK. And we want to add the rounding function to this one again. So I'm going to put my insertion point up in the formula bar, and I'm going to type in round. I'm going to close that parenthesis, or add the parenthesis. Then I'm going to put my comma 2 and close it. And now we've got that value rounded to 2 decimal places. All right. And we want to make sure that these are, our values are in the accounting format. So my last 2 are not. So I'm just going back to the Home tab, and I'm changing those to the accounting format. All right, now it wants us to calculate the total and average sales by region. So in cell B10, we want to use sum if. So luckily it tells us which one we want to use. So we can go up here and type equals, and you can just type in sum if and add that parenthesis. And it tells us that we want to calculate the sum of annual sales, where the value in the range, in the named range, so next we want to add the range, and our instruction tells us that our range will be the annual sales. So we want to go back to the formulas tab, and we want to click on annual sales. And then, sorry, it's not annual sales. Let me remove that. It is regions. Okay, and then it says where, and if you look on the instructions, it says regions is the named range. So we wanted to put range in there. We want to put our comma in. Now we're looking for the criteria. So the criteria is listed in B9. So we can just click on cell B9. So this is the N31 region, I suppose. And then the last thing we want to put in is our sum range. And so our sum range is actually the annual sales. So we should have sum if regions, comma, meets the criteria of B9, and then it's the sum of annual sales. And we want to close that. And then we can just hit enter or the check mark. All right, we want to copy that formula to C10 to I10. So C10 all the way down to I10. And you know, that formula will populate based on where it's located. So this one is based on B9, this one's going to be C9, this one will be D9, etc. All right, so now in cell B11, we want to use the average if. So again, we want to type in equals, and we'll start typing in average if, and it tells us what average if does, and we can put in our parenthesis, and now it tells us specifically what it needs. So for average if, the first thing we want to do is our range, which same range, so we want to go to regions, and then our criteria is again B9, and then our sum is, our average range is annual sales, and we want to close that. And then check, and I got an error, so let me see what I did wrong. Regions. Oh, okay, so for some reason I'm not sure what I did right here, but I should not have that colon with the B. I should only have B9 there. Okay, now it's right. I'm not sure what I did there. But again, we want to copy this formula all the way across. Okay, so next it wants us to add a rounding function to the formula in cell B11. So I've got B11 here, and it wants us to round the result to the two decimal places. So again, just like we did before, we type in round, close that parenthesis, we want to come all the way to the end of our formula, put a comma 2, and we want to close it again, and we want to hit that check mark, and then actually copy it over. I should have done that before I copied it over, but make sure you copy it over so that it updates the whole row. All right, now let me find where I am. All right, it wants us to format these cells, so that would be B10 to I11 with the accounting format. So back to the Home tab, and we can just click on the dollar signs there. Now the second part of the summary sheet contains a sales associate lookup form, but the appropriate formulas have not been entered yet. So in cell B18, it wants us to enter a formula to calculate the average commission earned for the sales associate's last name that's entered in cell A16. So it would be this area here. And it says, hint, use the database function. So use the named range earnings as the database argument, and the column labeled commissions earned as the field argument. The criteria range should be A15 to A16. All right, so it's telling us it wants us to use a database function, so we can click on more functions and we can type in database. And this gives us a list of different functions that we can use that are based on data, based on a database. And this is telling us it wants us to use the average. So if we look down through here, the most likely one would be this D average. And if you look at the description here, that's actually what we want to do. So we can go ahead and select that, and it's going to give us this pop-up. So it makes it a little easier for us to put in our arguments. So the first thing we have to do is designate the database. And the database for this one is earnings, and then the field. And it tells us in this description that we want to use commission earned. I'm going to type that in. And it tells us it's either the label of the column in double quotation marks or a number that represents the column's position in that list. And then, notice it automatically puts those double quotation marks in there for us. And then the last thing is the criteria. And the criteria for this one is A16 to B16. And we can select those, or we could have manually typed those in. Either way, it would have worked. And then click OK. And I did not get a value. So let me see what I did wrong. Okay, so I selected the wrong range. We actually needed A15 to B15, so let me change that. And you can just go up here and type in the correct value. So delete the 6 and type in the 5, and let's see if that fixed. That did not fix it. So let's see. Okay, so I just needed to slow down a little bit. So we needed to have the range A15 to B16. So it should be A15 colon B16. So once you change that and you hit enter, that should put the correct value in there. Okay, so the next item we want to calculate is the total commission earned. And on this one, it tells us again we want to use a database, and it should be so let's look at our database functions. So let me type that in, and again we have this list, and so there's several we could read through, but I'm going to guess, because it's telling us that it wants us to calculate the total commission. So typically when we're calculating the total of something, it would be the sum. So we're going to go with D sum. And again, we get this pop-up that allows us to easily put in this information. So again, we want to do earnings, and then our field would be commission earned. And then our criteria, and I will get this right this time, it's A15 to B16, and then we want to click OK. And there we got that value. Very easy this time. All right. Let's see. And then in cell B19, we've got that. Oh, it wants us to do the accounting format for 18 and 19. So again, home, accounting format. And then on the second page in cell B20, we want to enter a formula to calculate the number of clients a sales associate had with annual sales reaching the target set in B16. So this time, if we want to do a count of something, and we know that we want to use the database again, we can type in database, and we can search that list again, but we want to do the counta. So, and if we click on that, it just counts non-blank cells and records the data that matches only the conditions that you specify. So we'll do OK. And again, database is earnings. And this time it tells us that our column label will be client. So we want to type in for field, we want to type in client. And again, we want that same criteria, A15 to B16. And then OK. And mine is showing 61, which does not seem right. So we'll see. All right, and it wants us to add the general number format in B20. So B20 home, and it tells me it's general, so I don't have to change anything. So the reason I thought this looked wrong is because on the final version, it's a different value here, and I forgot that we're testing it, and that's the values that we'll actually see. So to test this, we want to type in one of our sales associates' last name. So we're going to type in Schmidt, and then annual sales. We want to type in greater than 175,000, and then this is the values I was expecting to see, so that's why I thought I had done something wrong. Now, one last step. It wants us to add the inferior function, IFER function to formula in cell B18. So again, we're just going to make that a nested cell. So we want to type in IFER, and then we want to put in that parenthesis, and it's telling us that that the value, which is which is this D average formula that we already have in here, and then we have to put in, you know, what we want it to say if there's an error. So we got to type in the value if error, and there we want to put in a comma, and then we want to type in associate not found, and we want to do that in parentheses. Sorry about that. Or quotation marks. And then we want to close that parenthesis. And we want to just hit enter. And you should not see anything different, but you should definitely see this in the formula. And then based on whichever sales associate you enter here, then you may end up getting the value associate not found. So now you should, it says if you receive errors, use evaluate formula to troubleshoot your formulas. Hopefully you do not have any errors. So I'm going to save, and I'm just going to upload this real quick to make sure I did not miss any steps before I end the video. Alright, no errors. So if you follow these steps, you should be able to complete this and correctly and without issue. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to give me a call or send me an email.